So welcome to our Off the Page event today. This is run by Kogan Page. The topic for today's event is optimizing productivity while working flexibly. For those of you who might not be familiar with us, we're an independent publisher of business books and content, and we have created these events to bring key topics to life. My name is Lydia. I'm a marketing executive at Kogan Page, and I will be hosting the event today. Today we have Tim Ringo and Gemma Dale, who will be talking about how to keep your workforce happy, engaged, and productive during flexible and remote working. Tim Ringo, Chartered FCIPD, is a senior executive board advisor, conference speaker, and the author of Solving the Productivity Puzzle. Gemma Dale is a Chartered Fellow of the CIPD, a senior HR professional, conference speaker, coach, and author of Flexible Working. Please note that this event is being recorded, so we can share the recording with you after the event. If you would like to tweet about the event, please use hashtag #OffThePage, and don't forget to tag Kogan Page, Gemma, and Tim. If you would like more information on any of the topics that we discussed today, please remember that you can save 25% on Solving the Productivity Puzzle and Flexible Working using the code OTP25 at koganpage.com. Just a reminder of the housekeeping rules for anyone that's just joined us. Please post your questions in the chat. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end, but also able to pick up any questions that you post throughout the event. If you do use the chat, please send messages to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your questions. And please remember to keep your microphone muted. Great. So I'll now hand over to Gemma and Tim to say hi and introduce themselves before we get started with today's first question. Gemma, would you like to say hi first?
Yes, hello everybody, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
Perfect, thank you. And Tim?
Yes, good afternoon from London. Looking forward to today. Thanks everybody for joining us. It looks like we've got great attendance, so thank you.
Great, so thank you both. And as we are ready to get started now, we'll kick off with our first key question of the day, which is, what impact has the crisis had on productivity and flexible working? Tim, would you like to start first with this one?
Yeah, sure. I think on productivity, obviously initially it had a huge impact, right? I think that people scrambling to figure out how to work in this new way, businesses being shut down, it really, you saw some of the statistics that came out in the summer that showed that UK productivity hit an all-time low over the spring and summer, no surprise. But we've seen it bounce back, so I think it is starting to come back, and I think potentially this crisis has knocked us onto a different path where we're going to address productivity and potentially build greater productivity in the future. I think flexible, it speaks for itself. Everybody's had to be flexible. Organizations, people, and it's been remarkable in this country, at least, just seeing just how flexible everybody has been. And I think it's been a huge factor in the economy, keeping it going, really.
Thank you. And Gemma, would you like to pick up from there?
Sure. I mean, from a flexible working perspective, the current crisis has escalated it significantly. I mean, if we look at just the data on home working alone, last year, around 7% of people working from home. By the end of April, that was up to almost half of the UK population. So we've seen a big escalation in home working. We've also seen people having much more schedule flexibility because people have been working in a different way. They've been working around childcare commitments and other caring commitments. So, we've seen both. But I think what's interesting from a productivity point of view, when you talk to individuals about the impact that working from home particularly has had on them, many of them are saying they feel more productive personally, however they are choosing to judge that. So interestingly, people saying that they, without the distractions of an office environment, they can do much more deep work and much more focused work. So I think, we're seeing people work in lots and lots of different ways during the last 6 months. And given where we are, that home working particularly looks like it's going to continue for a while. Hopefully we may be in a situation where it becomes much more normalised than it has been in the past.
Great, thank you both. So kind of continuing from Gemma, what you mentioned about people feeling like perhaps they're being more productive or doing more deep work, how would you recommend keeping employees engaged and avoiding burnout during this potentially more intense period of working?
It's a really interesting question, because I think the other thing that we've seen, and this came through from some of the research I did earlier this year with Liverpool John Moores University, which is we've also seen people saying that they've worked harder and they've worked longer during this time as well. It's really interesting. We used to have this sort of myth that when people were working from home, they were somehow skiving, and we wouldn't be able to see them and we wouldn't know what they were doing. But actually what lots of HR professionals are telling me is that's not the issue they're dealing with. They're actually dealing with the issue of having to nag people to take breaks, make sure people are taking their annual leave, and they're concerned about burnout. And I think that was very true in the early months of the crisis, as we were trying to adapt to all these different ways of working. So I think burnout's a real issue, and something we have to be hugely mindful of as HR leaders. I think engagement is a slightly different thing. And one of the things that I think is quite interesting for us to continue to look at is, as we know, we're at sort of 6 months, and there's a possibility we'll have many more months as well at home. How do we sustain engagement? So how do we do both of those things? Look after well-being, ensure people aren't burning out, but also that they're still connected with our organisation, our mission, our vision, our sense of purpose. And that doesn't sort of slip, it doesn't become somehow weaker as these months go on. So there's a dual challenge there, I think, for HR professionals and business leaders alike.
Great, thank you. Tim, would you like to comment on that question as well?
Yeah, I totally agree with Gemma. I think the thing that's really concerned me right from the beginning is that we've tried to take the analog world and put it into the digital and work in the same way. And it's burning people out. As I talk to my friends in the street and here who are all working at home, they are feeling, overburdened. They're feeling like, trying to do, the analog world and the digital world is wearing them out, constant Zoom calls. And I think one of the things that HR needs to do is step in here and say, look, let's stop with trying to do 1 hour Zoom. Can't we make it 15 minutes or 30 minutes? Can we give people breaks, and keep in mind that people are also picking up kids from school or doing homeschooling. So I've seen the same thing that Gemma has seen, which is that people are saying that they're certainly more productive, but they're doing more work than they would normally. And that I think I hear a lot of people saying they're emotionally exhausted as well, and that the Zoom calls are really draining. So I think it's something we have to be really careful about to keep people engaged.
I think one of the challenges is, as you said, we've sort of replaced what we used to do in an office and just lifted and shifted it to the home. So if we used to have a face-to-face meeting, and let's face it, lots of us used to say they weren't very effective in the old days, we've now just replaced it with Zoom. And I think not every organisation has taken the opportunity, or even yet had the time to take the opportunity to think, is there just a different way that we can work, working much more asynchronously, for example, and using those things like Microsoft Teams and so on to work differently. And I think that's possibly the point that not all organisations have reached, but some are now starting to think, what do we learn from this time? What can our people tell us about how we can work differently? And I think that's also a really critical activity for the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. And as if we look forward a little bit, one thing I think we need to think about is how we're going to mix home working in with the office. I think the home working bit is now, and Gemma's the expert on this, but I think it's now going to be a permanent fixture. But we have to be careful because, people like to go into the office. I mean, it's called a company for a reason. And if you look up the definition of company, it's the fact or condition of being with others, right? And that we have to mix it in. And I know a lot of people that I've been speaking to, and my wife's own personal experience, she's been going in 1 day a week, and that lifts her spirits tremendously, just being able to do that. But she really likes working at home. She does find it's more productive for her. But I think as we go forward and start to come out, hopefully next year, the other side of this pandemic, I think we have to start thinking about how we're going to mix the two, right? And there's tremendous productivity and engagement to be had from that. I think it's a great opportunity.
I think we've I completely agree. We've seen a number of different pieces of research now. I've done some myself. We've seen a number of surveys all coming through and saying people want to retain some aspects of working from home, and this idea of a hybrid or a blend, I think in the past, lots of people probably felt they could work from home and they'd be just as productive from home, but they never had the opportunity to really experience it. And now people have had that, they're quite keen to retain it. But I think, again, to Tim's point, most people recognise that it is a blend. It's not, they don't want to do this 5 days a week. They want to have the ability to go into work, to do that creative work, to build those relationships, and then stay at home for some of the week for that deeper work. So I think the current challenges for organisations are, how do we make that work? Particularly when we move to a situation, you've got some people in work and some people not. And that's actually when collaboration and communication starts to get a bit more challenging and a bit more difficult. So that's going to be a critical learning experience for organisations. How do we help our managers with that challenge as well? But I think it's increasingly clear now, very few people want to go back to the way they worked before, which for a lot of people was the default Monday to Friday, 9 till 5-ish kind of working model that for a lot of people also involved a kind of long and not very satisfying commute.
Great, thank you both for your answers on that question. You've touched on some kind of myths or misconceptions about flexible working and productivity, but we wanted to explore that some more. So are there some common misconceptions about flexible working and productivity that you'd like to debunk or challenge? Tim, did you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I looked at this extensively in my book, Solving the Productivity Puzzle, because I found this was really a key factor. Managers, a lot of managers are more comfortable when they've got their team around them and they feel like they can see what they're doing. And today's work just isn't like that. People want more autonomy. They want the opportunity to work flexibly. And also it kind of forces people to work longer hours. If you're in the office and the manager's there, you're going to stay, and you don't necessarily need to. I mean, Deloitte and McKinsey's have done some studies recently that show the ideal amount of work hours for humans, regardless of culture, is around 34 to 36 hours a week. Any more than that is diminishing returns. But yet you'll see people stay in the office for, do 40, 50 hours a week. There's really no reason to do that. You're actually more productive if you work smarter and try to reduce the amount of time that you're focused on work. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it's something that that I found in the book. So the thing that the myth is that, as you said earlier, Lydia and Gemma, is that people the managers aren't comfortable with it. Well, I think this situation's forced them to be comfortable with it. And I think I've certainly seen it and heard it, and anecdotally, that people are saying, yeah, I feel a lot more comfortable now. And I think that's a really good thing going forward. Give people autonomy to choose when they work and how they work, and even how many hours they work, right? It should be about outputs, not the time spent on the work.
I think that there's a number of myths around flexible working in general, and then home working in particular. So if I take flexible working, what do we tend to favour? We tend to favour, we default to, we can see people and therefore they're doing good work. We conflate this idea of presence and performance. So anybody who tends to step outside of that and wants to work less hours than full time, they can be subject to all sorts of myths. So there's a range of academic research that says people often believe that flexible workers are less committed to the organisation, that they don't work as hard, and from a managerial perspective, that they're harder to manage. So that's a problem. When we come to home working particularly, it's what I often refer to as the homes under the hammer myth. Which is, if you're not looking at somebody, then they're going to be putting the daytime telly on, and they're not really going to be doing what you want them to do. So I think, I agree with Tim to a point in that, it has forced managers to think differently about how they're managing, and it's made us, I think lots of organisations had this kind of list of those kinds of jobs over there aren't going to be suitable for home working or suitable for flexible working. And it's really forced us to challenge those perceptions. And I think that's true of some managers. Equally, I was reading an article which I tweeted just an hour or so ago this morning on the BBC News, which was that they'd got some different stories together of organisations and how they're monitoring people. So there was one company that was sort of, they were taking photographs of people to check that they were working and monitoring keystrokes. So I think, the other side of the coin is, if that is your management philosophy, if you always have been one of those sort of, if I go back in the theory, sort of McGregor X and Y, if anybody remembers that one, if you were theory X and you just thought anybody else, I've given the opportunity, What we've sort of tried to do, or some organisations trying to do, is replace that. I'm keeping an eye on you with keeping an eye on you through tech. So that's a challenge, because that's fundamentally about how much do I trust people. And you can't just go along to a manager and go, trust your people, and you know, and expect that they're going to completely change their management philosophy.
Great, thank you both for your answers on that following question. Just a reminder to everybody that has joined us today that we will be opening our audience Q&A shortly. So please make sure that you are posting any questions or thoughts you have in the chat box, and that those messages are going to all panelists and attendees. But first, we've got our final question from me, which is, what is your advice for HR going forward? Gemma, would you like to start us off with this one?
Absolutely. I think one of the early things I would be saying to do is this: if you haven't done it already, is a really good time for a listening exercise. So going and talking to your people, what have they learned from this time? What have been their big challenges, their big takeaways? What do they want to keep, and what do they, you know, what are they looking forward to giving up when things get a little bit more back to normal, if we can use that language. So I think employee voice is really important, because that's also obviously a critical part of employee engagement, and we've already talked about that challenge. I think the other is got to be around sort of mental health and well-being. So we know that this is an astonishingly difficult time for a lot of people, and whilst in some circumstances working flexibly, working from home can really benefit individuals' well-being, especially through things like improved financial well-being, improved life satisfaction from not commuting. At the same time, the uncertain nature of the pandemic, the uncertain nature of how long we're going to be working from home is a challenge. And we've still got people as well who are working from home in kind of suboptimal conditions. So they, you know, they're still at kitchen tables. They still haven't got their childcare back to the way it used to be. So whilst this has taken us forward, it's challenged some of our misconceptions around home and flexible working. And even productivity. At the same time, people are still under a lot of strain, and they're not really working in a typical flexible way. So I think continuing to be cognizant of that, and continuing to support people to work from home and retain their well-being as best they can.
Thank you, Gemma. Tim, would you like to pick up from there?
Yeah, I'd just like to share a slide if that's okay. Can you see that, Lydia? Can you see my slide?
Yes.
So just on the point of productivity, again, we saw it go down, we see it coming back up. But remember, before we were already in a productivity crisis. We've seen people productivity steadily going down for 10 years. And piece of advice I would have for HR is, you know, to get the economy back on its feet, we need to work smarter. And you'll be working on a lot of you'll be working on this, but I have a sort of quote unquote equation: right people, right skills, right place, right time. Really important. Right motivation gives you kind of, you know, engagement, innovative workplace, and performance. And I think, you know, underpinning all of this future flexible working that we're going to have such a different situation. We've got such a huge opportunity in front of us to fix the productivity problem once and for all. I think we need to get this in place, and this is a mindset backed up with processes and technology. And so where does technology fit in? Well, you know, we've got this equation, but we multiply it times some of the you know, really powerful AI and machine learning that's coming. We can actually, you know, not only fix the productivity problem, but go on to historic people productivity. And I think this mix of getting knocked onto a different path by this virus, being able to work flexible going forward, which is a big part of what I say in the book, helps to fix the problem. You know, put this mindset in place, put these processes and technology that create the situation: right people, right skills, right place, right time, right motivation. I think this would be the main bit of advice I would have for folks, is to underpin HR in your organization in this way, and flexible working will flow very, very effectively in your organizations.
Great, thank you both for your answer on that question. So that brings us to the end of the first half of this event. So we'll now be moving into the audience Q&A section for the remainder of the event. So please do keep posting your questions in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we can get to as many of them as possible. So our first question today comes from Anna, who has asked, how can you manage a blended team and keep both team effectiveness and team spirits high? Tim, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I think, I kind of touched on it in that equation. I think right people, right skills, right place, right time, right motivation. That should be an overall principle. And through that, you get the right people working in the right way together. And I think that helps to address that. But I think in the current challenge, where we're mostly working from home, it's just super hard to make that connection through Zoom. So I would much prefer to be in a room with you all having this conversation. It allows, Gemma and I to have that connection. Well, we just don't have that at the moment. And so, you need to come up with creative things. I mean, one of the things that my team did, I retired in April, funny time to retire, but we had sort of weekly happy hour on Friday, and that was a lot of fun. And we made that a lot of fun. So things like that, you're probably trying similar sorts of things, but we got to still have that human connection. We have to, and we can get back into the office a bit to build that connection.
Great, thank you, Tim. Gemma, did you have any comments on that one?
I think the sort of the hybrid thing is a challenge. It is absolutely a challenge. As Tim says, there's some stuff you can replicate pretty well through technology, but it will always have its limitations. So I think there's lots that organisations can do, but noting that a lot of it's going to be online, and for some people, to your earlier question around burnout, another thing on Zoom might just be too much, even if it's a more social thing. So I think that it's important to provide people with a range of different things that they can do. I think from a sort of a leadership point of view, having things like open meetings, that you can get a couple of hundred people in a Zoom meeting, having those kind of town hall type approaches, leaders taking Q&A, those kind of things are really important. I think also keeping people connected to the organisation. I've been talking to an organisation this morning that has got some people back in their office environment, and they're sort of taking photographs and sharing them on social networks of what it's like in the office right now. So I think things like social networks can also really come into play here. I can see somebody in the chat says, what else can we do? Because we've done quizzes and things and they're getting a bit old now. And I completely hear that. So I think, look at things like social networks. So whether you have an equivalent of Yammer or Workplace, those kinds of networks can be really important. One of the organisations I do a lot of work with, for example, they've got lots of social groups on there. So they've got a book club, they've got a parent support network where people, are just sharing funny stories when they were homeschooling. There's even a pets group where people have been uploading photographs of their sort of cat walking across their screen and things like that. So it's finding those little ways to inject a bit of humour and make sure that your comms isn't just work-related emails. And wherever you can, trying to just build in lots of different options and different ways that people can connect. A really nice idea that an organisation I know of is doing is something called Coffee Roulette. So really simple. They've got a little spreadsheet that once a month matches people that are interested in being in Coffee Roulette. It matches you with one other person and you just have a Zoom coffee with that individual and get to know somebody else. So, there isn't one single thing you can do, but just trying lots of different ways to keep people connected.
Great, thank you, Gemma. I know you picked up on Louise's question from the chat, who was asking, how can you make staff feel more connected to each other when they're working remotely? I just wanted to ask Tim if you had any kind of additional comments you wanted to make there about this kind of social side. I know you mentioned your happy hour, but if there was anything else you wanted to share during this session.
Another thing, and again, it's about getting people's mind off the work for a little while, right? While still being together. And, some of the other ideas I've seen is actually doing, putting a band together on Zoom and recording and then playing that back. And we've done some of that as well. But, hopefully we're not going to go into complete lockdown. And I still think we should be setting aside that time where we can meet up for a coffee with people, right? And do try to do it in the analog world and mix that in. As Gemma said, the technology ultimately is going to be really limiting. And so it really is, and we have to abide by the government, guidelines. But at the moment, it's saying that, we should try to work from home. But that doesn't mean we can't meet up in a coffee bar or something like that and socially distance in that way and do those things. So.
Great, thank you both. Our next question from our audience comes from Claire, who has asked, what additional HR considerations are there if your team moves from full-time office work to a blend of home and office work? Gemma, would you like to start with that one first?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's some stuff that I would put in the kind of practical bucket. So things like, you know, are you going to provide, you know, a contribution to utility bills? Are you going to actually pay for people to have a desk and a chair and all of those kind of things? I think they're quite critical. Lots of people work from home, as I said before, in sort of not exactly optimal conditions. That was okay during a crisis. It's not okay long term. So I think that's really, really important, is to deal with that. I think there's also then a need to think about, how do we assess performance? You know, if you can't see somebody, if that's how you've default in the past to assessing, are they productive, are they performing? We have to kind of rethink that a little bit too. And how do we judge people? How do we then, you know, reward them as well for their contribution? So that there's a rethinking aspect to things like judging performance and engagement and communication. Communication is absolutely key. And it's part of keeping people connected to the organisation, keeping people connected to their team. So I think there's also a need to go back to basics and look at those wellbeing strategies, those communication strategies and those engagement strategies, and say, how do we make these things fit for a more blended world? And every organisation, it will be different for them. Depending on, you know, their time zones, their product, the type of organisation, the service, etc., that they provide. So I think, you know, as I say, practical things, comms, engagement, well-being are critical things for HR people to think through now.
Thank you, Gemma. Tim, did you want to pick up on that question?
Yeah, I would just build on the well-being one. Part of well-being is I think the setup you have at home. You know, do you have a proper screen, keyboard, you know, a good chair? It seems like hygiene, but it's really important. I've seen a lot of people complaining that their backs are killing them now and they've got problems with their neck. And that's coming from not having a proper setup, you know, trying to work on a laptop. So I think, you know, part of well-being is companies and ensuring people have a proper chair, screen, keyboard, those sorts of things. But also I think organizations should take advantage of the one thing that people say they love about working in this kind of mixed way at home and in the office is there's more family-friendly, home-friendly time. And I think just being respectful of that, to allow people to take chunks in the day when maybe they're going to be spending time schooling the kids or picking the kids up. And I think, you know, really promoting that is a real positive side to this new way of working, and that, you know, what you can do to keep it, making it family friendly and home friendly will be much appreciated. Lastly, having a personal space somewhere where you can work that almost feels like it's away from the home. I'm sort of lucky. I've got the studio at the end of my garden, but not everybody has that, right? But you have to, you know, people have to find their space that they can work in, and that's part of getting the physical setup right as well.
Thank you, Tim. Gemma, I know Tim's comment on kind of family and how that might need to restructure your working day kind of fits into some of the topics that you discuss in your book around flexible working. I wondered if you had any comments on that side of things. I
think it all comes back to this idea around, you know, rethinking work fundamentally. So when we go to an office, when work is a place in that way, you know, we operate this default of 8-hour days, 5 days a week. All came out of the end, you know, the Industrial Revolution. We didn't have to work that way, but it was a tradition, it was a habit. And of course, you know, when we were working around things like trains and all this kind of stuff, there was some element that was necessary. I think, and this does apply slightly to a question later on, I can see in the chat box around procrastination. One of the other things that people have said to me during this time is they've really thought differently about when they are productive and effective personally. So some people have said to me, I realise I'm much more of a morning person, so I'm getting up at 7 and I'm cracking through some work, and then I'm having a 2-hour lunch break. I've also had people say to me, I realise I'm much better at night. I was talking to an academic who said, my writing is coming alive in the evening. And somebody else, another example, said, I found I work really well in 15-minute bursts and then get up and do something else. So I think it's freed us a little bit from the structures. So I think there's an element of, we can empower people to do that. You know, we don't have to say, we're going to look at your, you know, your light on Microsoft Teams and make sure you're green and sat at your desk for the same number of hours in the same way that you did in in an office environment. So I think to come back to that question, we can empower people if we want to work around the school run, or to work around other commitments, because it's about shifting our focus to what are these people delivering, what is their level of productivity, what is their level of value creation for our organisation, as opposed to, you know, well, it's 1 minute past 5, so they must have done everything that we need them to do. So it's about rethinking entirely, and we can, if we want to, empower people to work around all that other stuff, that family stuff in particular.
Yeah, totally agree, Gemma. I would just add to that, you know, in the research for my book, one of the things that I found, and it was really quite surprising, but a lot of data supports this, that humans generally are more productive between 10 and 2 and 4 and 6. And that those are the real hours that people, now others, you know, other people are like better from 4 to 8 or 6 to 8 or whatever. But the point is that organizations should be encouraging finding that sweet spot for their employees to say, what part of the day are you most productive, and letting them work, you know, in those periods. And so it'll be really interesting to see if maybe we see some change come through now that we wouldn't have before, which we will start letting people maybe come to work at 10 to 2 and then 4 to 6 or those sorts of things. But I fundamentally think to work smarter, we have to adopt things like this. That are coming along, and the data is stronger and stronger to show that, you know, we don't have to stick to this industrial age 9 to 5 as Gemma has said, and she writes about in her book. I think we have to really challenge that as well. And I think we have to look at schools. You know, why do we send kids to school at 8 a.m.? They don't really wake up until 10. You know, but anyway, that opens up a whole other can of worms. But in all seriousness, I think it's something we have to look at.
Thank you both for your perspectives there. It's interesting to think about how the way we approach the workday may shift or already be shifting. So Gemma referenced this question from the chat, which I'm going to pick up now, which has come from Kate, who asked, do you have any tips on supporting employees with procrastination during this time? How can you overcome this when you are feeling like your creativity is blocked at the moment? Gemma, would you like to pick up that one first?
Sure. So I think, you know, we have to be mindful that we are living through an astonishing event. There's this kind of "we're all in it together" phrase that's become really popular, but actually our experience of this is very, very individual, depending on, you know, as I say, the extent of the impact on us. Are we parents? Are we not parents? Have we been unwell? Have the people we love been unwell? You know, it's been a very unique experience. So maybe feeling like you're not very creative, maybe feeling like you're not performing, you know, it is entirely normal. So I think part of it is we may have to tell our employees that it's okay to you know, to not be necessarily at a level, and also to forgive ourselves a little bit if we feel that about us as well. You know, come back to just being a little bit kind to yourself. You know, but in terms of things like procrastination, I do also think it comes back to that other point, which is let's encourage people to, you know, to rethink if they're not feeling creative, they're not feeling like they're in a place to do something because it's 9 o'clock and that's not when they work perfectly. Let's do that thing of encouraging them to reflect on when it's a good time for them to work, when they are most productive and creative, and facilitate that rather than trying to shoehorn them into a box and say, well, sit at your desk anyway. But, you know, I also think to some extent this comes back to some of the well-being stuff, because if you're not well, if you're under stress, if you are feeling anxious, you know, if you're concerned about your job security, a whole range of other things that are going on for people, if you've been on furlough and you're struggling to get back into the routine, some of this as well is going to be about helping people recover, you know, their wellness so that maybe they can get back to a place where they're feeling creative again. So it touches on a lot of different things. I don't think there's one answer to that.
Yeah, I would totally second that, Gemma. I think, you know, I've been pretty much a full-time writer now for a year, and I get these kind of points in the day where I can't do it anymore. And you know, some of the things that I try to do is mix in playing some guitar or go and exercise. The other thing that's really important, I know it sounds silly, but hydration is really, really good for the brain. I learned this in the research for my book. It's one of the things in the solving the productivity puzzle. I know it sounds silly, but it has a huge part of that. So taking care of yourself, hydration, distract yourself with something in your office, go for a walk, just mix that in the day, plan that in the day. And I think, that helps to really unblock the kind of, procrastination, or it re-energizes, I find. My wife finds, very similar. She likes doing crossword puzzles. That's a different, she doesn't play guitar. But
Great, thank you both. Our next question comes from Debbie. Debbie has asked, do you feel HR directors are equipped to deal with an ever more important focus on workplace wellbeing? What support do they need, if any? Tim, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, doing research last year, I actually had well-being well down the list. I didn't see it as that important for productivity, but as I got more into it, it just became so important. It was in the top 2 or 3 things I ended up writing about. And I think what companies need to do, and I think absolutely HR directors are in a great position. Companies are going to invest now in this idea of well-being. I'm absolutely convinced. But there's 3 elements to it that you've got to invest in. It's the physical well-being of the person, back to the drinking water and those sorts of things. It's the mental well-being, and I think we're going to have a lot of trauma coming out of this. It's going to last for years, and managers with high EQ that can recognize that and help people address it's going to be important. Third is financial well-being, right? There is nothing that stresses people more than their home life or their financial life, and those 2 are usually entwined. So when you're thinking about your well-being program, you need to think about not just the physical, but the mental. It's okay to say I'm not well and ask for help. And third, the financial. And there's some things that have been done recently in the financial space where there's these apps now where organizations can sign up and people can go borrow £500 against their next week's wages without the organization knowing about it, because people don't like to go ask for a loan, right? That has produced tremendous amount of de-stressing of people, particularly at the moment. So just think of it in those 3 things. Don't be afraid to go ask for the investment around this, because I think you'll find CEOs and CFOs are going to invest in this space.
I completely agree. I was talking to Professor Kerry Cooper, who I'm sure Kogan Page know well, because he also is a rights for you. And he's sort of saying, his view is we'll see more and more organisations having chief wellness officers and seeing this as a fundamental critical issue. If I can pick up Tim's point around trauma, and I appreciate this has got nothing to do with flexible working, but the trauma research tells us that people will typically fall into 4 buckets. People who will be absolutely fine and have no long-term effects from this. People who will be fine now, but the trauma will come out further down the line, possibly in some months to come. Because for whatever reason they've not been able to kind of process this or let it out now. We then have the category of people who their well-being is not great, but with a little bit of help, with a little bit of support, around things like nutrition and energy and sleep and all those things, that they'll recover reasonably quickly. And then we have a number of people who will become seriously unwell, and things like PTSD will be an issue. What we can never really say is how many people will fall into each category. Professor Ivan Robertson from Manchester Business School says about 70% of people will be fine, but that's also a chunk of people who will not be fine. And I think one of the things we're seeing, and one of the things we sometimes see when people live through trauma, they have this kind of crucial life experience, and they reflect, they think about what's important in life. What do I want to do? What gives my life meaning? And, I've already heard, even in the midst of economic turmoil, of people kind of resigning from their jobs, looking to do something different, thinking about starting a business. And I also think that's a bit of where the I'm not going back to the office 5 days a week thing comes from, which is I'm not going to work like that anymore. I'm not going to be a slave to the train company. I'm not going to be, picking my kids up at 1 minute to nursery closing. I'm going to live differently after this. So I think, these things are intertwined. To the usual question, are HR directors ready? Some are and some aren't. Some organisations are brilliant at this stuff. But I think, there's also a need for some organisations to think more strategically about this and potentially bring in expertise as well. The 2 things that impact wellbeing in organisations, one of them is number 1 is workload, number 2 is manager style. And I think what organisations must do during this time is train their managers on mental health, train their managers on well-being, and their role within it as well. So I think it's not just a HR thing, it's that we also have to get our managers up to speed urgently.
Great, thank you both. It's interesting to see, Tim, that you mentioned that wellbeing's kind of crept up on that list of important priorities, and Gemma, that you think that's somewhere where organisations should be investing in to make sure people have the skills and are equipped to handle that in organisations. So our next question comes from Adunkul. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name, but looking now more at individuals rather than organisations, who has asked, how do you think people in themselves can maintain work-life balance while working from home? Gemma, would you like to kick us off with that question?
Yeah, I think Tim touched on some of these earlier, actually. I think, one of them is about and recognising that not everybody lives in a house that allows this. Not everybody, has got the physical space. But wherever you can, have a physical separation between where you work and where you spend your social time. If you can't do that, literally get a box and put all your work stuff in it at the end of the day and put it somewhere that you cannot see it. I think those boundaries are really important. So, having some kind of personal rules, yes, I'll take a lunch break, I'll still take my annual leave, even if the restrictions mean I can't go anywhere. There is no single answer to this because everybody's kind of needs will be slightly different. What works for one person will be different from another. But I think, there's some other things around, having a good routine, and making sure you stop work. It's really easy when your PC's in the lounge or your PC's in another room to just have one more look at your email or respond to one more thing. So I think there's an element of needing to be a bit strict with yourself as well, and kind of having those boundaries and saying, I'm not going to do that. It's something that lots and lots of people struggle with, and tech's made it harder. If you can as well, help your people with this stuff. There's great webinars and things you can run on helping people find balance. So whatever guidance you can give to your people as well, that's will help.
Great, thank you.
I would just add,
Sorry,
I think I just think it requires discipline. I mean, one of the things I think that comes out of, weeks and weeks of lockdown, I think people got a lot more disciplined than maybe they were before, because you were kind of forced to. And I think it's good to carry on that discipline, even through what's probably going to be a semi-lockdown over the winter, and continue to just, as Gemma said, you got to put the things in different boxes and keep them separate. I think another thing is to keep track of your screen time. You can get apps that do that on your PC, and I use the one on the Apple phone, and I think that's really important that you're logging off. I mean, it's so important to take those eyes off that screen, and I think that'll be an important part of working going forward, because that work-life balance, when the PC is just right there all the time, you're going to be drawn to it, right? And even if it's for stuff that's not for work, you just have to be, I think, a bit careful about that time.
Great, thank you both. So that brings us on to our final question for today. If anybody in the audience does have any additional questions, please do feel free to tweet Kogan Page, Gemma and Tim using #OffThePage, and we can continue the conversation over on Twitter. But our final question comes from Anna. So we've spoken during today's event about how the workday is changing, what a company looks like is changing. But do you anticipate that the role of HR needs to change to support this new way of work? And if so, how? Tim, would you like to start on this one?
Yeah, I've wrote quite a few blogs in the past couple months, actually, on this. You can see them on my LinkedIn or my website. But this is, I think, for HR, a huge event. I think it's a huge opportunity. CHROs, this crisis is a people crisis. It's a health crisis. And the focus is on HR, just like in 2008, it was focused on the CFO. And so there's a huge opportunity. I have seen and I have heard, HR stepping up to the mark. And, now that a lot more of what HR does in the back office is kind of automated or outsourced, you can now move into the, more fun space, which is focusing on things like what I showed in my equation, getting right people, right place, right time, right motivation. You can focus on succession planning. You can focus on all these things that really add value. And so I think having knocked us onto a different path, HR is now onto a different path, and it's going to be one where, you know, HR is going to be at the much more at the center going forward. So as I said before, don't be afraid to go ask for that investment that you're going to need to do the things that you need to do to keep people productive and engaged.
You know, I think for me, I agree. It fundamentally changes our role. You know, because almost everything needs to be rethought. How do we attract people? What's our employer value proposition? For those organisations who just want to get people back to the office real quickly, and you know, I've heard about them already. You know, that's not going to be an attractive proposition for people going forward. But you know, there's all sorts of things. How, what are the policies and procedures we need to start with? But how do we attract talent? How do we engage people when they're working in different ways? How do we keep them well now during the next sort of 6 months, and while the virus is still a big part of our life, until we return to whatever normal will look like? You know, as I said before, how do we performance manage people? How do we reward them? It does fundamentally change everything that we do. It is a massive opportunity, and we need to meet it, because if we don't, other organisations will come along and do that. I think the one thing I would say is that, you know, we have to remember HR are just on the same learning curve. Lots of HR people, you know, this is hugely new stuff too as well. You know, they've gone through their own adaptation to technology, to working from home, working remotely, and are under the same pressures that everybody is living and working through a global pandemic. So there's a lot to do for HR in the weeks and months to come, without question.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your answers during today. I hope everybody that joined us today found that insightful, and that you've managed to get your questions answered. As I said, please do feel free to join the conversation over on social media if you had any further questions. But thank you so much, Gemma and Tim, for your answers today and for joining us for this event. Just a reminder for everybody that this event has been recorded, and you will all receive an email after this event, including a link to view the recorded discussion. I've also put on the screen both Gemma and Tim's books as a reminder of the discount that's available on our website using code OTP25. Additionally, I've got some upcoming events that may be of interest on the screen here. To see a full list, please do visit our website, where you can sign up to join us again in future. So thank you very much, everybody that joined us today. And thank you again to Gemma and Tim for sharing your expertise and your research with us as well today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.